Today I'm out in Detroit taking a look at GMC's latest entry in the hottest segment in North America, the compact SUV segment, and this is the 2025 GMC Terrain. Let's take a look. Even though we're starting out our exterior design walk on this Denali trim, I have to let you know this is coming as a 2026 model year Terrain in calendar year 2025. So AT4 and Denali are happening a little bit later, but the reason I'm showing you this model is because A, I think it's the best looking, and B, because I think the color works best in this studio at the moment. All models have very similar headlights, but the Denali is going to get animated startup headlights here in this turn signal and daytime running lamp module, but every version is going to get LED headlights. GMC is really positioning the Terrain as a more premium option in this segment, not just for the Denali and the upcoming AT4 trim, but also the base elevation trim. And you do have some design choices to make. If you want a lot of sort of a matte chrome in your small SUV, then you definitely want to take a look at the Denali trim. If you want something that's a little bit more discreet, maybe a little bit more rugged looking, then you want to take a look at the AT4 or perhaps even the elevation trim. Coming around the side, you can see, of course, the boxier style that we find in this generation. That's really noticeable with the upright proportions, the upright and boxy hood here, and in the Denali and AT4, we get marker lights here in the front fenders. That's something that we've seen in other GMC models, and I think it works really well with the Terrain. This is a little bit bigger than the outgoing model. It's a little bit longer, a little bit taller, and notably wider than before, and that really helps with the muscular look here. They've really flared out the fenders, front and rear, really improving the track width. They say that's not just for visuals, but also for stability, because the tires are actually further outboard. The body inside, however, that's about the same size as before. The wheelbase has stretched out a little bit. We don't know exactly how much interior room that adds to the picture, but it should be just a little bit bigger than last year's model. We also don't have official cargo room specifications. Coming around to the back, of course, we have the big Denali badging there, actually quite a bit bigger than the Terrain badging, which is now down here on the bottom. And that, of course, makes sense, because when you talk to a lot of GMC owners and you ask them what they drive, they will tell you, I drive a Denali. They don't necessarily say I drive a Sierra or a Yukon or something else first. We, of course, have, again, that matte chrome effect trim down there at the bottom of the bumper, rear parking sensors in this model, and we'll have the same sort of animated startup sequence on these rear tail lamps. Moving over to the AT4 model, this is again the more rugged interpretation of the Terrain lineup, and I think it's really obvious in this model especially how tall and upright the hood is. It's also relatively long, so it definitely gives us a different stance and a different proportion to before. The front end, this is also different. Of course, different in each of the three different trims. It's worth noting that the two different trims that used to be at the base of the Terrain lineup have been merged into the elevation trim, which we're going to take a look at in a moment. Back over to AT4 though, we have the red recover hooks that we find in other AT4 models, a revised front end that looks a little bit wider visually than some of the others, and of course lots of black accents all the way around. Although I have to say, for more of a rugged off-road theme, we do have a lot of shiny black plastic up front, and that could get scratched if you do want to take your AT4 a little further off the beaten path, especially these fender flares here that are also shiny black plastic rather than matte plastic. On the other hand, we do get all-terrain tires on this model and a unique 17-inch wheel. You can get 17, 19, or 20-inch wheels depending on the way you want to equip your Terrain. In the middle of the tailgate, the AT4 gets the GMC logo instead of the Denali logo. Terrain's still down there, and at the bottom we get black inserts instead of the matte chrome insert that we found in that model. Now let's take a look at effectively the base trim of the Terrain. This is the new elevation trim, again replacing the former SLE and SLT trims. They've merged them into one and definitely tried to elevate the experience. GMC wants to be seen as the premium entry in this segment, and part of that is by deleting basically the base trim, giving you more standard feature content, and making it look like the upper end trims as well. So even though this does not feature the startup animation we find in the Denali, the design of the headlight and the full LED units are basically the same as far as their visual appearance when everything is on. Full LEDs, including the LED turn signals there. This model has black accents all the way around and the black grille. Now these are not the base wheels, these are the optional 19-inch wheels that are available on the elevation. But the elevation trim actually gets sort of the more off-road friendly matte black wrap around the bumper and around those wheel wells. I think that would be my preference personally for an AT4 trim, because again, if you do want to take this a little further off the trail and you do end up scuffing things along the side, these are going to be easier to replace on the vehicle and a little bit less expensive, generally speaking. Black accents down there at the bottom of the bumper. We have the Elevation logo there on that side, and here you can see the taillights when they're on. Again, that wraparound LED look. Now you notice on this Elevation, as well as the AT4 trim back there, we have a two-tone roof look. This is going to be available across the lineup. If you get the black paint job, you get the silver roof. I do like that because if you like a black vehicle but you live in a hotter climate, you probably want this silver roof. It's really going to reduce the heat load on the inside. On the other hand, if you like that sleek look, you can get the black vehicle or even the teal or any of the other paint jobs with the black roof option. I would probably skip that if you live in Phoenix though. All Terrains are going to have one engine under the hood. It's a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder turbo producing 175 horsepower, 203 pound-feet of torque. But there are two different transmissions offered. If you get a front-wheel drive Terrain, you are going to have a continuously variable automatic transmission under here. If you're not a fan of CVTs, and I understand that some of you aren't, don't worry, adding all-wheel drive will delete the CVT. Instead, you get one of General Motors' traditional 8-speed automatic transmissions. So you do have the choice. Do you want better fuel economy with the CVT? Or if you're not really a CVT fan, you can get the all-wheel drive option, but you can actually get better fuel economy in that model by not turning on all-wheel drive. As we see in other GMC vehicles, the all-wheel drive button on the dashboard allows you to basically have a front-wheel drive Terrain with an 8-speed automatic transmission and slightly better fuel economy than when all-wheel drive is permanently engaged. Now, unfortunately, at this point in time, I don't have official fuel economy numbers yet, so I don't know exactly how much the CVT will save you, but you can expect probably 1 or 2 miles per gallon versus the 8-speed auto when all-wheel drive is disabled. Now let's take a look at the inside. Now, unfortunately, this Denali and the AT4 are locked and they're off, but they have the windows open and I can show you a little bit around the interior. The reason I'm doing that first is that this interior is simply lighter in color than the Elevation they brought along, although there are going to be some different interior options for the Elevation trim. The shapes of the dashboard are very similar from one trim to the other, and a lot of the features that you see in this model, including the big LCDs, those are actually standard in every trim. The upholstery and trim options are obviously going to change a little bit. Over here we're in the AT4, and this is perhaps my favorite interior color combo in the Terrain, at least that I've seen today. I like the piping and the contrast there, also the fabric inserts in this leather upholstery. But again, as you can see, the bulk of the dashboard, that's basically the same across the lineup. And that brings us along to this black on black Elevation interior, which is a little bit more tricky to film than the others. Up here we have a sunglass holder, controls for the power moonroof, and we do have that big panoramic moonroof in this model. This is not going to be standard in the Terrain, but it is going to be optional in the Elevation. Let's check out the sun visors. These are slide to the side, which is a nice touch. We then have fixed height shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, height adjustable headrests. This model has the optional leather upholstery. Cloth is going to be standard in the Elevation, just as you'd expect, but the basic seat design, that remains about the same. And these are a little bit more thickly padded and a little bit more thickly bolstered than average in this segment. Moving over to the front door panels, we definitely see a significant improvement versus the previous generation Terrain in terms of the materials quality. We have some hard plastics right there at the very front of the door and of course at the bottom of the door to help improve durability, but the armrest and the upper door section, those are all made from soft touch materials. The trim panels, those are basically going to change based on the trim level you look at. This is sort of a, I'm not quite clear if that's supposed to be imitation wood, but it's kind of a geometric pattern that I find intriguing, and they've done it subtly, so it's not all across the interior. Moving over to the dashboard, this dashboard, the materials are going to change a little bit based on the trim level, but even in the Elevation trim we get a lot of premium touches. So soft touch upper section, stitched midsection there, a little bit more of that. Not quite clear what that trim is, but I do like the look running across the dashboard. Harder plastics, of course, down at the bottom of the dash. Big bin-style glove compartment down there at the bottom. But the big deal in here, of course, is this big touchscreen LCD in the middle of the dashboard. They basically borrowed this right out of the Acadia. And when I say the same screen as the Acadia, I'm not talking about the format or the style or the look, I'm talking the exact same screen. And that means that in this interior, it feels enormous. It already feels pretty big in the Acadia, but this is a much smaller vehicle. So it really dominates the dashboard in a way that we don't necessarily find in this segment. GM, and specifically GMC, has been really big on big screens, and we're seeing that across the entire lineup. This is running the latest Google operating system, so not only do we have this big Apple CarPlay or Android Android Auto presentation, but we also have, of course, the Google Play Store. So you can download Waze and run that natively on the system. All the other Google apps that are available through that are available as well. You can see over here we do have the factory integration of Waze. Now, I do have a few complaints about Waze and its functionality in this system. If you want to know more about that, of course, you can check out our other videos on this particular infotainment software package. One of the cool touches with the system is that we have basically customizable home pages where you can see multiple different apps at the same time. And even though we have touch buttons down here for things like the climate control, we also have physical duplicated controls. So if you want to touch the touch screen, you can do that. Or if you want to touch those buttons or use those piano keys down there, you can do that as well. And the volume knob, it's a physical knob on the screen with some displays that actually kind of curl around to show you your volume level. Down here we have two USB ports, a USB-C and a USB-A port. This is not a phone charging mat location. That's actually where you can toss your keys, etc. It's a rubber mat for that sort of thing. We have two medium-sized cup holders. I am not sure if the larger takeout drinks will be far enough apart to not interfere with one another. The charging slot for your smartphone, that's back there, and it does seem to accommodate those bigger smartphones. We then have a padded center armrest that opens, if I can do that, like that, and then we have a reasonably deep storage well inside. Moving back up to the dashboard, you can see that the style is definitely based off of the GMC Yukon. It's very similar with this large binnacle that wraps around to those two air vents in the center. We have the center channel speaker for this particular audio system and an approximately 11-inch LCD instrument cluster there. This is running the same software that we find in those other GMCs with things like the animations there, the full screen mapping, supporting Apple CarPlay mapping and Android Auto mapping, etc. And it is adjustable with those widgets that are selectable on the screen. Moving out from there, again, steering wheel is actually pretty similar to other GMC models as well, with the low button for the transmission over here rather than on the shifter, because the shifter is the new digital shifter basically pulled from General Motors EV lineup. So you can see it's a column mounted stock. You pull it forward and then reverse and drive or by up and down. Over here we find controls for that multifunction LCD cluster, along with some controls for the adaptive cruise control system, which is standard. The all-wheel drive button I mentioned, that's right over here. So again, if you want to add all-wheel drive to the equation, you hit that button, and then you'll see the display on the screen will switch from two-wheel drive to all-wheel drive. That's how you know that system is engaged. We then have auto brake hold right there, and then the drive mode selector switch here. If you get the AT4 model, we get some additional drive modes that are more focused at off-roading. Under that center console, there's also a small storage area there for your knickknacks that you don't want to be easily seen. Now let's go ahead and check out the seats. Again, we're in the elevation trim, but we do have two-way adjustable lumbar support. I would love to see four-way lumbar support. I don't know if the Denali is going to get that particular feature. The seating position feels nice and upright, just as you'd expect out of a vehicle that's big and boxy like this. And we have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. I appreciate the fact that you can also get the steering wheel high enough up that you can actually see everything going on in that instrument cluster, something that you don't actually find in every vehicle with an LCD cluster. Sometimes the positioning of that versus the seating position, it is a little bit tricky. Now let's check out the back seats and see what kind of room we get. We've always had a bit more room in the Terrain than something like a RAV4, and that definitely seems to continue with this generation. I'll scoot over here so you can see what kind of legroom is going on. I have maybe about 4 inches of legroom left. This is the kind of vehicle where you could probably fit a rear-facing child seat behind a 6-foot-tall driver up front. Now, coming in for a closer look, you'll notice we do have a slightly wider than average rear bench, really obvious back here with this armrest that has 2 cup holders in it. But if you are going to put child seats in here, we do have these little plastic doors on the latch anchors. And I've never been a big fan of that because you can either end up having them break off, or if you do take them off and put them in your glove box, you're probably going to end up losing them by the time you have to return your car from that lease or go to sell it again. The cargo area, we don't have any cargo area specifics just yet as far as specifications go, but it does look on the large side for this segment. It certainly is square and upright. I suspect we could fit maybe about 5 24-inch roller bags back here, but you're gonna have to wait until our official tests. There is some additional storage space under the load floor. If I go ahead and remove that from the vehicle, I'll let Nick go in there and see. So lots of additional storage space actually under that load floor. I am a little bit surprised that GM didn't go for a 2-stage load floor where you could use more of that space. And then further down the rabbit hole, there is a temporary spare tire. So if you're looking for a vehicle in this segment with a spare, this is definitely going to be one of the few. And based on the size of that underfloor storage area, I suspect you may even be able to put a full-size spare there yourself if you wanted to do that aftermarket. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion, not quite flat with the cargo area in the back. You can see there is a small lip there, but it looks to be a pretty accommodating cargo area. And especially because we have more legroom than something like a RAV4, I suspect you'd be able to fit larger items inside. If you're interested in the Terrain, this is going on sale a little bit later in 2024, so you might want to reach out to your GMC dealer soon if you want to be one of the first to get your hands on the new Terrain. Unfortunately, I don't have pricing information on this model yet, but I suspect that comparably equipped, it's going to stick pretty close to the outgoing model. If you want all of the extra features and gadgets, etc. on your Terrain, you can probably expect to spend a little bit more, and it's going to be a little bit more time likely until we get pricing on the AT4 and the Denali trims of the Terrain, because these again are not coming later in 2024. They're coming in calendar year 2025 as a 2026 model year vehicle. The Terrain is actually going to be one of the later 2025s on sale, it appears, and that's probably why these models were a little bit later in format, because there's probably not going to be an exceptionally long 2025 model year for the base elevation trim. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section, especially what you think about the big LCD screens on the inside. This is something that GMC has been doing really well. From the Acadia, now to the Terrain, and of course the refreshed Yukon, we get big screens on the inside. And I have to say, I prefer this more vertical format orientation screen as long as the rest of the dashboard has been well designed for it to be there. And that's something that, again, GMC has done pretty well. I would say that other manufacturers like Volvo and Polestar also do a good job with vertically oriented screens like that, but some car companies, they stick up strangely from the dashboard, or they just look too big for the interior. This screen looks huge inside the Terrain, but it actually looks well designed as far as having the air vents wrapping around it and the rest of the functions in the dashboard. So let me know what you think about that down there too, or would you prefer a horizontal orientation screen? Of course, General Motors has you covered either way, because you could get a Chevy, and all those Chevys are going to have that horizontal screen. The GMCs are going to have the vertical screen. I have to say, this is my personal preference. I also like the interior color options available on the Denali. Of course, that's coming a little bit later. Let me know what you think about all that. Comment down there, of course, at the bottom of your screen. Find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those other social places. And if you want to be included in some of our future podcast episodes, you can also call that number down there at the bottom of your screen. Leave us a voicemail, and your comments and your questions will be integrated into future podcast episodes. Just as always, make sure to leave us your name and email address if you want us to email you when you are included in the episode. And of course, speak clearly, and we'll see all of you later.